All right, it's time for the 10th recap in this long series detailing the events of our ongoing open-ended campaign for Edge of the Empire. In recap 9, the last scene described was of chaos. The group had participated with their various allies in disrupting a ceremony honoring the arrival and takeover by the Empire of the government of this world. A world that the importance of which they hadn't recognized when they arrived, but after time passed, they began to recognize that as a staging area, its value to the Imperial Navy was quite high. And add in these factories producing different types of TIE fighter and its location in relationship to known hyperspace routes and zones of control in the mid and outer rim. The Empire was not going to let this world go without a fight. And so they really didn't mind participating in this disruption. Now, they had planned the disruption purely as a means to ingratiate themselves with the planetary governor. Now, what they learned was the governor wasn't going to be there. But his aide did give a speech, and they made some initial connection with him. And as the event is happening, and as they're waiting for the flyby of these different models of TIE fighter, the NPC force user, Gammon, is making his way secretly into the city center, where he will be able to obtain, I think, floor plans and blueprints for the cities, the major cities on the world, and for former government and industrial installations, which the Empire is little by little taking control of. They wanted to have as much information as they possibly could, and they had been asked, almost forced via obligation, by the Tenla Syndicate, one of their close allies, pretty much the only group in the galaxy that they haven't managed to offend in some way. That's an exaggeration, but so the Tenlos wanted them to learn as much as they could about the ISB operations on the planet. They knew that the Imperial intelligence was operating out of the governor's mansion, and they couldn't penetrate the security. They couldn't penetrate the cultural levels that separated that stratum of society from the one on which they operate, and on and on and on. They needed the group to try, at least, to get this information. And it was in Highwind's best interest that they learn everything they could about Imperial intelligence anyway, and so, yeah. So Gammon is undertaking this to facilitate any future operations to glean information. And so he's separated from the rest of the group. And as all of the different members, PC and NPC, involved in the group are dissipating throughout the crowd, really everybody is isolated from everybody else. They're all operating separately in this scene. And little by little, they start to escape from the scene as they complete their tasks. So there are rebel commandos that they've snuck onto the world, and these guys are responsible for safely setting off false explosions in the crowd so that no actual people are hurt, and really taking shots at the Imperials who are there as an honor guard. And they've managed to set up, with the aid of their local street gang, they've gotten control of these basically pheromone bombs. And the planet is home to these giant eagle-like creatures, which at this point in the story, the group doesn't have any idea of, except as a threat. There are signs saying, watch the skies, and these eagles, wild, are a threat. They carry people off and feast on them. So the plan was enhanced by bringing wild eagles on the scene. Now, normally they'd be repelled from the city by certain technological devices. These were disabled, and as the TIE fighters come flying over for their their demonstration run and the totally faked ceremonial detonation of the monument to General Kenobi, the Eagles attack. And so we have this overhead image of these giant clawed and massively beaked bird-like creatures tearing TIE fighters apart in the sky. People are scattering, parts are raining down, fake and real bombs are going off, blaster fires going every which way, and the group scatters. Now, at the end of the last recap, I mentioned that T3 had gotten engaged with recognizing a droid. It was there as a protocol droid. It was there as an assistant to the governor's aide. The governor's aide had been giving a speech on behalf of the governor, who did not attend. And she recognizes that this droid's design is the same design that her creator, a lunatic, a man with all kinds of violent plans for the galaxy, he had to have had a hand in. And so she's very suspicious. And as she rolls up trying to make contact with it, it poisons, under the cover of all this chaos, the governor's aide. Moss springs to action very quickly as she notifies him, and he drags the aide to safety. Highwind covers his retreat, and T3 launches herself in a slicing attack versus the droid. And they battle back and forth because they're both similarly equipped for this kind of attack. But she overpowers the droid and puts him into a kind of standby mode where it becomes very passive. And she learns a lot of details, not the least of which is that this fake protocol droid was given to the governor, planetary governor, as a gift by Imperial security or Imperial intelligence agent Solara Crescent, who has been hunting Highwind for years. So there's these layers are now beginning to cross over each other, and whatever game Agent Crescent is playing is becoming more and more complicated, a thicker and thicker web. But for what purpose? What is her game? The group doesn't know. T3 decides she really needs to spend more time with this droid, so she vacates the scene, taking it with her. So Gaumon has left, T3 and this captured droid have left. Moss has gone back to their staging area, which is a basement near the city square, and he's desperately trying to save the governor's aide's life, and basically managed to do so, although the injuries were so severe, the poison, the toxin used was so devastating that the man will never fully recover. But out in the crowd, Henry's still circulating, causing chaos, and Highwind is kind of watching Moss's back. And they're waiting for Tyra, the young leader of the street gang, who's force sensitive, to show up with their escape vehicle. She has stolen a covered speeder, a speeder van, like a loading vehicle. And so she comes careening into the area, and Henry makes eye contact with her, and he starts moving across the courtyard to load up, and Highwind is following with him. And we ended on a cliffhanger with the poisoning. And so now we've had our establishing scene, and two Imperial agents drop down from above. Maybe they use force leap to jump off the top of a local building, but these are operatives. These are our version of Inquisitors, and two of them armored, fully armored, lightsabers ablaze. They have these blank helmets like the Imperial Guard. They just drop into the scene. Boom. Everything freezes for a second. Who are they here for? What's going on? Henry can sense the dark side in them, these two guys, and he's thinking, am I strong enough to fight two opponents, two force-using opponents with lightsabers? Highwind doesn't hesitate. Highwind, bam, has his heavy blaster out and has fired before anyone even realizes it happens. And this is where it gets really terrifying, as the agent, the operative at whom he fires, reflects the bolt back, choosing to direct the energy at Henry, who has snapped out of his miasma and is charging across the courtyard with his lightsaber blazing. So obviously you could reflect the bolt back at the person who shot you, which makes a certain amount of sense, or you can pick on the massive, muscled, armored, charging, lightsaber wielding threat, and that's what he chose to do. So Henry is injured more severely than he's been injured in maybe at any point in the campaign, but he doesn't flinch. He keeps charging forward. He's going to have to deal with these agents. Galman is too far away to help him. The rebel commandos have already left the scene. They've got the kids who are fleeing the scene. We've got Moss, who has to escape with the governor's aid. Somebody's got to stop these guys. It's going to be Henry. So, in real life, at this point, right, we've processed just part of turn one. We're getting the part of Henry takes the hit, and he's charging forward for his attack, and because of circumstances in real life, we've been playing in Hangouts for this one particular episode. And boom, I lost my internet connection, which caused an incredible increase in tension and a delay of a whole week as we wait for what's going to happen with the second half of round one. So that was kind of fun, a good kind of tension. So a lot of aggression built up over the intervening week, and when these two forces were finally brought together, when Henry finally got to unleash on the operatives, it was brutal, and the dice, as they sometimes do, rolled with him. So we've got this scene of these two heavily armored operatives, red lightsabers ablaze on top of the speeder van, and the reflection of the bolt, and Henry gets hit and he's charging forward, and the group did something a little clever, and they gave the next initiative slot to Tyra, who's driving the van. And so she uses the full throttle talent, which I enjoy, and suddenly the van is going top speed. She just peels out of there. Now, the Inquisitors, the operatives, obviously tumble off the top, and now Henry goes, and he comes charging in. And this is why it's fun, I find, to play with a highly abstracted system, because there's a lot of things that you could do, and there's different ways to approach it, like if you're using grids and miniatures or not, or whatever. But we're all kind of getting bound up in the excitement of this, so that the van pulls away at top speed. One of the operatives just, tumbles through the air, and he lands on his feet. He's going to be fine. But the other one, the one who reflected the bolt back at high wind, he's injured by that exchange too. There's just no way that he could reflect all the damage back at another target. So he's hurt, and he also blows this athletics check to neatly land on his feet. And this gives me a bit of an idea. So as Henry comes charging across the courtyard, with his lightsaber drawn, he's going to end this guy. He's been hurt. He's maybe a little afraid, he's intimidated, or whatever. He's coming in, and there is going to be death. So all of this exchange happens in the air. The Inquisitor is twisting off the back of the van. The operative is twisting off the back of the van. He's trying to maintain his balance, but can't. He's oriented towards Henry as he comes forward. He has an energy buckler, an energy shield on one arm of his armor, and of course he has his lightsaber out. And obviously, if you're falling off the back of the van, you're going to want to turn your lightsaber off. But here comes Henry charging in. So he has the ability to parry, as the talent parry, and I think this is going to be kind of cool if this happens in the air. But this is a lot of stuff to think about, and this is a whole new area, all of these different specialization trees and talents. So the game kind of slows down at this point, actually, and I think it will be necessary if I want to become more fluid with this type of combat, if this type of combat is going to be a more regular part of the campaign. And at this point, I don't know if it will, but I'll want to run simulations and tests so that more of these talents are, just kind of in active memory rather than just familiar. There's a lot of things that these new specializations can do, just as many as any of the previous specializations that we've been messing with. So some of them come with cost, some of them come with cost and strain, some of them are if-then talent. So there's a lot of things to remember. And it would have been nice if I'd had all of this stuff, right at my mental fingertips, so that I could have run this combat very fast and thrilling for the players. As it was a bit of a slog in places. Purely my fault, and so hopefully in the future we won't experience that again. But the operative tries to parry and manages to reduce the incoming damage significantly. But Henry's a monster. As frightening as these operatives are, Henry is more than anything else. As much as becoming a mystic, as much as he's becoming inspired and moving towards paragon status, all these things considered, he is a close quarters combat machine. So despite the amazingly acrobatic parry, despite the armor, despite everything else, Henry wounds him with the lightsaber and gets a triumph. Now, I'd like you to try and put yourself in the player's shoes. He's facing off against a lightsaber-wielding opponent for only the second time in the entire campaign. It's the first time where he hasn't had backup of another Force sensitive. He's got Captain Highwind, who is absolutely deadly, but he doesn't have someone standing there right with him with another lightsaber and Force abilities. And he's got two opponents with lightsabers and real training and armor. And now that he is punching his lightsaber through that armor, he recognizes that this armor is cortosis. And all the special abilities of his lightsaber, or most of them, are basically canceled out. Imagine the look that I would get across the table. Like, what are you trying to do? Kill me? And with all of the tension, with the intervening extra week of play, there was a lot of emotion and exaltation at this triumph. Like, yeah, I'm going to get him. There was a wound done. Criticals are possible. The triumph can be translated directly into a critical against this character. So now all hope is riding on a toss of the percentile dice to see what kind of critical can be generated. Now, Henry, as a character, has access to talents which increase the severity of criticals, like Vicious. And the lightsaber itself has the Vicious quality. So it really comes down to, can I get a high enough roll on the crit chart to send, this on its way? So he rolls a 96. And with the combination of all these things, which can elevate the critical rating of the attack, he's able to, in one shot, kill this highly trained, highly armored opponent, which is something that I really appreciate about this system. Generally speaking, it's abstract. You're taking wounds. You're free to narrate those wounds in any way you see fit, and encounters can be long. They can, you can have running chases where the characters grow fatigued and they start taking minor wounds which start to add up, and you can have that kind of experience. But at the same time, the system is able to provide you with situations where it's entirely possible to take an opponent out in a single hit. So the near terror of the moment before, like, how is this going to happen? I cannot take this kind of damage. I do not have the kind of armor and equipment that this guy has. I do not have the training that this opponent has. If he survives this and can attack me, I am dead. That's this situation. Lawrence is sending his character, Henry, into the jaws of death if he gets hit even once. he's dead. Or at the very least, horribly wounded, unable to continue in this encounter, in need of immediate medical attention, and even after receiving it will survive with some kind of horrible critical injury, such as the loss of a limb or an eye or something. I mean, this is an amazing act of bravery, which I find nice, as it coalesces very nicely with the two pillars, the emotional pillars, the strength and weakness of Henry as a force-using character. Bravery to counteract or in balance with his tremendous anger. So, we've gone from terror to exaltation, and there's one more opponent. Maybe it's possible I could survive this after all. What is he going to do? Which of the two have we just taken out? Because there's been no communication of any kind. It's all happened just like that. So, did I take out the stronger of the two or the weaker of the two? Are they exactly the same? But those sort of questions are flashing around. We've got Tyra speeding away in the speeder van. We've got Moss dragging the poisoned aide through the sewer. We've got T3 making her way back with the droid. We've got Gauman stealthing his way back to the ship with the secret plans. We have Henry with his lightsaber standing over the recently made corpse of one of the operatives, and we have the other operative right there. Now, a message comes in from T3 saying that alarms are clamping down all over the city and that squads are closing in on the town square. It's a trap, of course, gets said, and everybody laughs, diffusing some of the tension. That's nice. Play is really starting to speed up at this point. We're in the groove. We've got the emotional component going. And, well, what's going to happen next is we have the lightsaber exchange. But maybe not the type of exchange you're expecting when I say that. Henry sacrifices his attack in order to try and tear the lightsaber from his opponent's grasp. He doesn't want to get hit by it. The conditions haven't changed. He's really not interested in taking any damage from his opponent at all. And this is especially considering his current heavily wounded state. So he reaches out with the force power move to tear it from his grasp. And this has never not worked for Henry before at any point in the campaign. He's always been able to move things, maybe not as large as he had hoped, but could always do it. And he's successful here. He has the ability to tear it from his grasp, but he is denied. This force user is well trained, well disciplined, and is experienced with this sort of tactic. It simply doesn't work. Iwan snaps off a quick shot, and despite his deadly accuracy, it is deflected, going off into some wall somewhere and doing no harm. The agent barely paying it any mind, focused as he is on Henry. And then our operative gets to reply, and he misses. Narratively, we have freedom. So Henry's armor takes the blow. There's the sparking discharge of a lightsaber against a metallic target. Henry feels the heat and knows how close he came, but he's unwounded. What's going to happen next? We have more events around the square. We focus on Moss for a bit as he's trying to make his way out of the sewers. He has to avoid Imperial patrols, and they're getting closer and closer, and he knows with the aid he's not going to be able to escape. And so Moss, being Moss, he finds another way, and it's a very small grate which he can drag the aid through, and he goes through there, covering up his tracks, and makes his way to the public subway system, public transit system, by another route, passing under the Imperial forces. T3 takes the initiative and begins messing with Imperial chatter. There's not much he can do about the forces which are converging on the town center where the characters are, but she can prevent the lockdown that's occurring at the spaceport and divert attention to different parts of town to thin out patrols. And I'm not really sure what happens with Gaumon in the intervening time, but he makes it back to the ship all right. T3 makes it back to the ship. Moss gets clear of the Imperial noose, which is closing on the town center. We flash back to Henry and Captain Highwind. And what is happening is that, as I mentioned, Tyra is speeding away, and she's going to one of the many access roads away from this central area around this huge monument. And Imperial troops are closing in. They know this. They've been notified by T3 that they're coming, and Tyra can see them. So she charges the van right into a cluster of oncoming stormtroopers. So this would be the backup that the operative has been waiting for. And now they're not going to be able to make it. And rather than continue to engage with Henry, he instead diverts his attention to the van and, using the power of move, hurls it at horrifying speed and intensity up into the air. Henry has to decide. Is he going to catch the van or deal a killing blow? He catches the van. The operative leaps up through a window on a higher story, escaping. Highwind and Henry rush in to the van to make sure that everything's okay. Tyra's startled and a little shaken up, but otherwise unhurt. The van is fine, so they climb in it and rush. They run down some of the remaining stormtroopers, they pick up a tail on stormtroopers on speeder bikes, and they drive wildly through traffic. Highwind passing his blaster off to the girl and, basically saying, make yourself useful. And she's leaning out the window and, for all they know, for the first time in her life, firing a weapon in anger at opposition. And she takes out the stormtroopers that are pursuing them, and Highwind's fancy driving shakes off others, causing vehicular collisions. They get enough distance that they're able to ditch this van, steal something else, and make their way back to the Archon. Well, once they get back to the Archon, they discover that somebody's there waiting for them. Moss and T3 and the other host of characters aboard the Archon have been entertaining a high-ranking member of the Tenloss Syndicate, someone who's there to refine exactly what their service needs to be and make them an offer. Sweeten the deal. In other words, as the Game Master, I'm offering them a change in obligation, and they go for it. You may remember in an earlier recap we talked about a terrifying, deadly gambling game known as Lobok. This was something that the group had done to get close to a Black Sun operative who was causing trouble in the VEV system way back in the early days of the campaign. Well, Tenloss has moved in on Lobok, and they have this great idea. And it turns out that bootleg film of Paul Highwind and Henry's participation in this nearly gladiatorial gambling game have become incredibly famous. It's making lots of money for the bootleggers, and Tenloss want in on it. And so they are willing to front the cash for the auction that this whole thing has been about so they could get the stolen freighter back. They will buy the ship. They will own the ship. They will let Highwind use it from time to time for whatever he needs it for, but mostly they're going to use it as a mobile Lobok arena where they can keep ahead of Imperial entanglements by moving around from place to place. They can shift up the competitors and whatnot, and they can turn this ship into an arena of chance games. Kind of interesting. And they will do it if Highwind agrees to appear when they ask him to take on competitors. Lobok is a very high-stakes game. Highwind ends up agreeing. They need to get this freighter, they need to get its cargo, they need to get it back to Haven, and they desperately want this chapter of their lives to be over. Every day is like a constant reminder of their betrayal of Wayland. Every day is living in fear that they're going to be destitute, they're going to be wiped out, and that the colony of Haven is going to be left defenseless. So They really, really want to see an end to this. And so they lie low for a little while, but then they realize they still have the aid. They have to get to the governor, and things need to move forward. They can't just lie low and hide until the auction. So they gather up the aid, and they make their way to the governor's estate. And what they found was out on this plain in lake country, this massive airy-like building, broad top, and this very, very narrow tower with a broad base. And the giant eagles of this planet landing and taking off, and they've got riders who are cocooned from the air and the chill temperatures by these cockpit-like structures on the giant backs of the birds. And they're finally getting a look at the nobility of this planet and what a completely different life they lead than the normal people and the factory workers in the cities. And with the aid's help, they get through security. They get taken up to the base of the tower, and then they're whisked up in a dedicated shuttle, way up high in the atmosphere, to the top levels of this structure, the governor's mansion. And they don't have to wait very long. The governor's in a meeting with some important people, but he ends it quickly, and he comes sweeping into the room. We're building up to yet another cliffhanger ending. And the entire crew has been debating, this, we can't go there. Imperial intelligence has said to live inside the governor's estate, it has to be a trap of some kind. We know Crescent is here somewhere. We know she's in the estate somewhere. We know she's close to the governor. She's giving him gifts and blah, 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 blah. We can't all go, but we have to go. So they talk themselves into it, and all the characters go to the estate. And there they are, ready to receive the thanks of the governor or be arrested or killed or whatever. They're not really sure. Everyone's on edge. And what happens? And I have to admit, I loved this moment. So again, try and put yourself in the mind of Captain Paul Hyland. In comes the governor, regal, graying temples, man of power. He's wearing some kind of leather aerial riding suit. He's got these big, heavy gauntlets in his hand. He's clearly able to go from boardroom to leaping on the back of an eagle in a heartbeat. He comes sweeping into the room with his retinue behind him, and who should be in the retinue? The very first person following behind him, but Solera Crescent, his former lover, whose father he killed, who's been chasing him across the galaxy with all the power of the ISB behind her. She walks in. But not in her imperial uniform, but in formal wear. She looks elegant, and they make eye contact. Cliffhanger. And then we wait another week, and so we have another week of anticipation, and all the other players are asking Paul, what are you going to say to her? What's your first line going to be? What are you going to do, when the stormtroopers come crushing through to drag you off to jail forever, and should we come rescue you? And lots of good player banter and all of that. And it's interesting for me to watch all of these thoughts go through Paul's head. What will I say to her? We're actually going to meet face to face. So when that next session came around, there was a lot of anticipation. Everyone's like staring at Paul. What's he going to say? What's he going to say? So I open up the scene. I back things up a little bit. The governor comes sweeping in, and I just re-describe the governor and the situation. He comes sweeping in with the retinue, and there's all these politicians and whatnot behind him, and the lovely and deadly Solera Crescent. And he walks in, and he extends his hand. He takes Moss's hand, who had stepped forward to shake hands with him, and he extends his hands out to the sides to shake hands with Henry and Paul. It seems like he's everywhere at once. He's larger than life. He's in front of them. Of course, all eyes are looking past him to Solera, and he's thanking them for saving his age. You're brave men, just the sort of men we're looking for. And then he turns before anyone can say anything, and he says to Solera, my dear, please take our guests into the boardroom. And she comes forward very demurely and very chastely and kisses the governor on the cheek, and then sweeps out with the whole political retinue. Not so much as batting an eye at Captain Paul Highwind, her hated enemy. I swear, Paul's mouth just dropped open and he was just looking there. He didn't know what to do. It's fantastic. And it was great that he was willing to go there, willing to put himself into Captain Paul Highwind's mind and roll with it, to be devastated, and to play this character who is so torn between wanting to run away from this terrible threat, wanting to run away from the terrible thing he did, wanting to find some connection to this woman. You know, it was a beautiful thing to see. And so the face of the group, the frontman of the group, the lead singer of the band, and all of these metaphors is suddenly silent. And everything falls on Henry suddenly. Normally it would be Moss who does negotiations and wheeling and dealing and making contracts, but this is not really that kind of situation. And it would be Highwind who would deal with the newcomers and make a strong impression, but he's out of action. And Henry steps forward and begins fulfilling the role. And Gauman is circling them, and it's like he's hunting for something. He's searching for something. He knows something is out there. They make a pretty quick bond with the governor. They like the cut of his jib. They like what he's made of, and they like what he has to say. And he knows pretty early on that he can trust them, but they take extra steps. They prove to him that his office is bugged. They prove to him that he's carrying a listening device on his person. T3 is able to sniff these things out easily. And then they drop the bombshell that this woman, who he claims is his fiancée and a member of the local nobility, is actually a member of Imperial intelligence. He recognizes the danger to all of them and the peril that they're in just being there, and so he moves the venue. He summons his sons, and they get everyone to mount up on the giant eagles of this planet, and they leave the area and they drift out to the mountains. And there's an industrial community way up in the mountains, and they go there to drop off the characters. And he says he's going to investigate and find out just how much of his planet he has given away to the Empire, thinking he was doing favors for other noble families, and now realizing that he's being manipulated and his position in government is being weakened step by step by step, so that Crescent would be able to hand this planet lock, stock, and barrel to the Empire. He's going into retreat to figure out what his options are. The characters are on the clock. They need to get to the secret location of their freighter in order to inspect it before the auction. And I just have to interject here. I've never been to an auction. I know nothing about auctions, and yet this auction has been building as a major plot point or point of interest for session after session after session. I wanted it to have some weight. And so there's a community I'm a member of on Facebook, the RPG Techniques Consortium. And it's just for game masters who are interested in talking with other game masters about how to do things. Like if you want to run a crowd scene, how do you do it? If you want to do investigation, how do you do it? It's that kind of place. And so I asked the question in there about auctions. How can I do an auction? I can handle a crowd scene, I can do negotiation, I can do all of this stuff, but I really don't know how an auction should feel. So Rob Davis, Swamper, stepped forward and he walked me through. He took a lot of his personal time to walk me through how auctions work from a couple of different levels, and basically everything that came out of his mouth gave me ideas for NPCs, for characters, for scenes and whatnot. And so I was able to run through 100 different versions of what an auction might be like in my head before the day. So when the day came, I was totally ready to improv from a realistic point of view, how things would go, how people might react. And so I owe you a big debt, Rob. Thanks for taking the time to do that. So the auction takes place on this massive freighter. It's one of the largest type civilian ships in the game. It's a huge silhouette. And every group that's interested in buying it has the chance to tour the ship. and check the cargo. And the auction house would like to sell both things together, but they don't care either way. It's an everything must go sort of deal. And I had initially thought that we'd do the ship auction first. If people didn't want the whole package, then we'd move to selling off the cargo. But thanks to talking to Rob, I realized that was a stupid way to approach it, and to create a lot more tension and make the use of money more interesting, we of course had to start with the cargo. And so there's different groups of bidders in the mix. A lot of different groups, including these pirate characters that we've run into a few times before. Captain Trench and Cadmus Other, the Skinner, and this mysterious Force user. No sign of the Wookiee that they had with them before, but they must be around here somewhere. And Highwind gets it into his head that, look, this whole thing is a trap. We know it's a trap. We've known for months it's a trap. There's no way that this auction is going to take place without Solera Crescent springing her trap, whatever it is. So, he's heard of this Captain Trench for years. He knows about him. They've tangled with him. Trench tried to steal their ship once. He does the unexpected, as he often does, and he does the very humane thing. He goes to their stateroom after all the tours are over and has a drink with them and says, look, this is a trap. It's a trap for me. Imperial intelligence is all over this system. The Imperial Navy has to be hiding out somewhere. There's just no way this is a real auction. Trench says, oh, you're crazy. That's ridiculous. Who would go to all the effort for you? This kind of reaction. But the Force sensitive, he knows that Highwind is telling the truth, and he communicates as much to Trench, and new respect is given, where quite a bit of respect was already in place. And so Trench and his crew, they just up and leave. Just run away, which was a little unexpected, I think, for the characters. Just whoosh, gone. So one obstacle in their path for getting the ship has been removed. Captain Trench and his bidders, gone. There's just a few other groups left, and quite a few of those groups are just interested in the cargo, not the ship. Now all the pressure starts to pile onto Moss, because he's the one who's going to be doing the bidding. He's the one who's controlling all the money. He's speaking with the voice of Tenloss. The governor also gave them a local credit ship, more so that they could move in high society. They would be able to use it as a sign of his favor. They just wanted to use it as coin, and that's how they bought their way into the auction in the first place, so that the auction house would know that they were good for it. So they start working on getting a sense of who they're bidding against, and who should walk in but Moss's old nemesis, and a character that vanished a long time ago during their period on Tatooine. One who is vying for Jabba's love with Highwind, who would be the most beloved in the vacuum left by the absent Han Solo. So this Rin Valiant character, he comes in. These two are going to bid against them, and they're shooting daggers at the group across the auction hall. Well, Henry's had enough. He's had enough of surprises. He's had enough of all of it. And he gets up, moves across the room, Moss backing him up, and Moss laying down as much intimidation as he can, but Henry uses the power of influence and basically says, you are not going to bid, you are going to leave. And we've never seen Henry do anything like that before. Certainly not from such a position of selfishness. Maybe it's not selfishness, but it had an edge to it. So again, as the game master, I'm taking notes, and how is the morality of Henry shaping up as slowly as his morality climbs up toward the 90s. What do all of these things, what kind of effect are they having? Is he becoming holier than thou, or is he, on a more undulating roller coaster ride of emotion versus discipline? So the influence is successful. The threats are successful. They recognize that Highwind and his crew are deadly serious about this, and they leave the premises. That's 2 groups cut from the herd, 2 groups they no longer have to compete against. And they start to breathe a sigh of relief. But then who should walk in but Agent Solera Crescent and her nobility guys with an entourage of these 6 strapping young men like military types, cropped haircuts, and they come trooping in, and seats are arranged for them, and they participate in the bidding. And as the auction is carried out, Moss has to be very careful what he bids for and what he doesn't. He knows what his credit line is, and he's not really sure about any of the other groups. How can he bluff? How much can he bid? How much can he risk? And things go on. They miss a few pieces of equipment in the hold that they don't care about, and then they double down to make sure that they get the ones that they do, which puts them on a pretty finite cap for the ship itself. And that's when they realize what it is that Crescent is doing. She's driving the prices up, and she's taking very careful notes about who's bidding on what and who's getting what. And then once the cargo has been dealt with, then we start getting in on the ship, and groups start dropping like flies as the price is going up very, very rapidly thanks to Crescent. Moss is holding his own, and finally, in a bit of a power play, the way that he bids communicates to Crescent that he has unlimited funds. He's going to win this ship, right? She stops bidding, and the auction is brought to a close. Everybody who did not successfully bid leaves and ostensibly departs the freighter for parts unknown. All the paperwork is handled, times and dates for delivery of equipment is handled, and the groups that bought the equipment and gear in the cargo hold that our group didn't want, they very quickly paid up and took possession of their stuff and departed. So that left our group, the auction house security, the auction house inspectors, and this massive freighter drifting in its protective asteroid field, hidden away from government eyes, except the government had just been there. Why did she leave? Where did she go? What is going on with this agent? A couple hours later, the auction house crew, they're ready to depart. The 10 Law Syndicate has arranged for a skeleton crew, to pilot the ship under the command of Lynn Delmar, Highwind and the Archon, and Moss flying their other freighter, the Hawk, now known as the Forgotten Knight. They are going to go back down to the planet and continue to deal with helping the growing rebellion movement on the planet. They just feel that they're not ready to leave just yet. The homeless gang is brought up to the freighter. They're going to escape with Lynn. Everything's going to be wonderful. Yahoo! So our 2 freighters, the Archon and the Forgotten Knight, they drop out of the docking bay of this huge freighter. Everyone says their goodbyes, and they start making their way out of the asteroid field. And as they get to the edge of the asteroid field, what is coming ahead of them but this massive heavy cruiser, the Infiltrator, an Interdictor class heavy cruiser with its 4 giant gravity wells and its escort. And suddenly they realize that something has just fired across their cockpit, and they know instantly what it is. When something that you cannot see and cannot detect on sensors is firing on you, it has to be those prototype TIE Phantoms that your killer ex-girlfriend is in charge of running. TIE Phantoms have entered the mix. And then, dropping out of hyperspace at high speed, they see Captain Trench's heavily modified light freighter suddenly appear. Another cliffhanger. Couldn't resist. The session after that was mass combat in space. Very deadly. And as we went through, the turns were both simply combat, but they were also learning about the enemy. And then at the end of the session, we knew that we weren't going to play for a 2-week period. So some of the things I tried to communicate in description or from impression or implication, I put into separate emails for each character and then sent to them so that it could be in some manner of fresh for today's session. The mass battle in space, in order to make sure that it went smoothly and that we could focus on the PCs, I ran 3 different versions of this battle as if the PCs were not there. And I ran 2 versions of it with my thoughts about what the PCs might do. So I had 5 test runs of this battle in space, which involved an awful lot of ships. There was the Infiltrator, an interdictor cruiser. There were 2 Victory class Star Destroyers. There was a Decimator, and there was the full complement of TIEs available. I needed to do some ruling here. There's no rate of deployment given for the TIE fighters in this material, so I had to figure out, based on silhouette, what I felt was a reasonable discharge rate for these crafts, and so at what rate they could fill the sky with TIE fighters. And I had Trench's crew. So he appears with a very combat-ready modified freighter and 2 squads of 4 Y-Wings. And everybody in the group has a different goal, and I realized that to be a valuable point. And so I sat down and I figured out, for each squad or squadron or wing or whatever, what capital ship, what were the goals being represented. And I needed to think about the whole combat from that point of view, because there were competing forces from a militaristic point of view, but also from a social point of view. There were different people involved in the scene that were involved in power plays with each other. And it made running the scene a lot easier. All of it is happening in our imaginations, and we're playing it in a coffee shop at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And so there's a lot of things to get involved and distract us. And I went prepared with notes. I hadn't been very happy with how the combat with the operatives had went. I felt like I couldn't remember the new talents that I wanted to use fast enough. I couldn't remember the costs of the new force powers I hadn't used before, worked and things. So I'd made myself just some very small notes, and had them on my tablet so I could easily flip back and forth. I had all the ships neatly organized, and so I could find all the data. So I wasn't at a loss for data. But there were a lot of things to consider. So I was really glad that I had taken the opportunity to run through so many simulations of the battle beforehand, so that when it came time for all the NPCs to take actions, I could just gloss over it. We hadn't undertaken a battle like this ever at any point in the campaign, and I wanted it to be smooth. I didn't really achieve the level of smoothness that I wanted, but I was very glad, like I said, that I took the time to run through the combat step by step so that I had accurate expectations of what the ships could do to each other. What would it be like if the Archon ran for it and was being chased by these other larger, slower vessels, but also being pursued by these much more nimble and incredibly fast TIE fighters? How long could the Archon hold out against their weapons? We had a sense of that because we faced TIE fighters before, but not in these numbers and not with these conflicting goals. What could the Phantoms actually do, and was I familiar enough with their operational parameters? What could they do while cloaked, and what could they, what would they have to give up in order to operate cloaked, and that sort of thing? What could a defender do? What would the interceptors be capable of doing, and so on? So having a sense of what the threat was and how quickly the enemy could chew up the Archon and the Forgotten Knight, this was very helpful in giving the description weight. Weight that Captain Highwind and Anri and Moss would have as members of this universe, things they've heard about or seen. Right? I wanted them to have all the information independent of whatever they might know about the stats in the game. So that was one reason why I ran the simulations that I did. Also, I wanted to know how heavy a load it was to lift all of this, because I had the Imperial force, which was quite large. Right? We had talking about a large pool of TIE fighters from which to draw, for example, and 3 capital ships, each with its own gun batteries, and each gun battery being different types. You know, are we going to use tractor beams or ion cannons? Are we going to use turbo lasers? Are we going to use just the quad laser cannons on the infiltrator? Everything's got different ranges. We've got different sensor crews. I wanted to be familiar with those things so that things could just flow. And when I say familiar, I don't mean something that I know, because I knew about these things before going in. And we've used each of these craft before. But I mean having it right here, ready to use as if it were my character. Now, I didn't get to that level. But I felt like we as a group took a step closer to where this sort of thing would be much easier to run the next time. Another way to have approached this would have been to use the mass combat rules. And there are definitely situations that I can foresee in the future, such as if the group decides to join the Rebel Alliance, where it would be much more convenient to run a scene like this, pitting capital ship and squadrons of fighters against each other using those rules, especially having done it this way, having a good sense of exactly how things play out between the same forces in several iterations of the same battle. What do the dice and what do tactics tend to produce? And then applying that to the mass combat rules, which is why I opted not to use them this time, but will likely use them in the future. So I knew what kind of damage the ships could do to each other, and I knew what kind of tactics I wanted to employ because of their goals and personalities for all the different commanders. And so with all of that in mind, we launched into this massive combat, and we did it in about 2 hours, and then we had bookends of 30 minutes of more interpersonal communication, like role-playing between characters about various things before and after. So it was about a 3-hour session that ran that included all of this combat. And so I would roll the dice live, and based on those results, would narrate what was happening in the rest of the battle. So what turned out was a tremendous escape for our characters, but a costly one. The ships were incredibly damaged to the point of view of near destruction for the Archon, and scary level of destruction for the Forgotten Knight. Captain Trench's ship was critically damaged and had to flee the battle. The Infiltrator was heavily damaged, and its gravity wells were damaged, and its subspace drive was damaged. Why was Trench there? What was he trying to do? The group doesn't know. Why weren't the gravity wells active from the beginning of the battle? The group assumed that they were. They didn't try to run right away. They tried to open the distance between them. They tried to deal with the clouds of TIE fighters as they got messages of surrender from the Imperial forces, including these terrible soul-crushing communications from Crescent, using great talents like Scathing Tirade, for example. The pressure is just piling onto the group, and they just figured like there was no escape until they saw, as the attack directly on the Infiltrator by Trench and his crew heats up, they saw the gravity well generators spin up, and they realized they could have escaped at any time. Well, now what are they going to do? So, in a lucky critical, they were able to disable the gravity well generators. The escort ships, the 2 Victories, thanks to Highwind's piloting, have never really been able to get into the right position. The teamwork between the Forgotten Knight and the Archon has increased fire to a tremendous degree on the pursuing TIE fighters. So they're making very short work of them. Very few of the ships that get damaged, stay through to the bitter end. No one seems to be willing to die for the Empire today. So when their ties get damaged and not destroyed, they peel off. And there are all these messages being sent back and forth, and T3 is aware, but the crew isn't aware until later, that there are orders and counter orders and different commanding officers within the fleet are possibly countermanding each other's orders. They're sending conflicting messages. So we've got the interceptors who are on the Archon and the Forgotten Knight like ticks on a dog. They definitely are out for blood, and they are just blowing pieces off the ships. And it's all all the crew can do to fight back fast enough to prevent their own destruction. Meanwhile, the Phantoms are just kind of following them. They occasionally get sensor glimmers, and toward the end of the battle, the Phantoms drop their cloaks and they come in for the kill. But it's in a completely different style. The interceptors were coming in just raving for blood, and the lead and the wing just both opening up and peeling away hull like nobody's business. But the Phantoms are taking it very slowly. When the defenders come in, they following the same tactic. Very defensive fighting, and the lead ship trying to gain the advantage over the Archon or the Forgotten Knight to come in for a nice, safe, and devastating attack, possibly a crippling attack, not a killing attack, as they sort it out later. But all of this chaos is going on, and in the midst of all of this, we have the interplay over the comms. We have points of view from characters who are in turrets versus characters who are in cockpits versus characters who are struggling to deal with all the damage that's coming in. And it's very difficult to deal with damage in space, in combat. So, again, tension is mounting, and we're building and building and building what's going to happen. And this has become a delaying action. All we want is for the freighter to be able to escape, and it's so slow. The ship is so big, and it's drifting, ever so gracefully out of the asteroid field trying to make its run. And until just a few seconds ago, it felt like it was never going to be able to escape because of the gravity well generators. But the savage attack by Trench and his 2 squadrons of Y-Wings actually has some success. They damage the infiltrator shields. They manage to keep the body of the infiltrator between them and the Victories. They manage to elude the decimator, and they're trading blows with it, and it's a messy scene. And the Archon and the Forgotten Knight are crisscrossing each other so that they can double up fire on the fighters. And slowly the ships are getting more and more damaged, and what's going to happen? The freighter is able to make the jump to light speed because the gravity wells of the infiltrator get damaged and cycled down. The Victories finally come in. They can bring their heavy laser batteries to bear on the ships. So Highwind and Moss know they have to make a run for it. But here's the last piece of this emotional puzzle to go with all of this combat. During the middle of the combat, their third ship, the Viceroy, suddenly appears. They don't know why it's there, and sensors have been jammed throughout the whole combat. Communications have been jammed, except for what the Imperials forced throughout the combat. And so they don't know why the Viceroy has shown up. They know that their ally, Life Striker, will be flying it, and his telltale maneuvering of this clunky old ship is obvious to them. Now, this ship is one they use for their legitimate business. It's pretty much their only source of legitimate cash. So why is he there? Why did he come? But it's time to run, right? And his presence draws their attention to a ship they hadn't realized was there. In fact, until later when they analyzed the battle and were talking to each other, did they realize the ship had always been there, kind of hanging, waiting. And it bore bounty hunter markings, and it was a ship that they knew belonged to Jabba the Hutt. So what's that all about, and why was it there, and why is it suddenly now pursuing the Viceroy? Or is it? And none of these questions can be answered before they have to escape. T3 calculates the jump. The jump is communicated to the Viceroy, to the Forgotten Knight, and the 3 ships after the huge freighter piloted by Lynn jumps to safety. They take off going in separate directions. And they're not going far. They're just going far enough because their plan, the plan all along, was to double back to this planet to continue their operations against the Empire. There's no way they're leaving these people now. So I loved that about what they were doing. They weren't just going to run. They weren't going to cut bait and say, forget this planet. We did our part. We dropped some rebel operatives on it, and they can take care of it. We've rescued the kids. What more do you want? They absolutely could not let it lie. Despite the threat brought by Crescent, despite the presence of the Imperial Navy, the growing success the Empire is having taking over the local government, despite all of that, they were going to go back into the teeth of danger and take it on. And that's not even bringing up the surviving operative or Inquisitor. This session ended on a real high. Today's session started from the jump. They jumped to a dead system, one that they had marked on their smugglers' maps of the galaxy, that was just devoid of life. They went there, they assessed their damage, they licked their wounds, and they waited for the Viceroy to show up, and it never did. And finally, T3 revealed to them that she was fairly sure that he had been captured, and they reviewed the data that she presented to them and concluded that possibly he had turned his ship and there was a cloud of oncoming TIE fighters and he had driven into their formation. And that's the last piece of viable speculative sensor data that T3 was able to put together from just before they jumped. So they believe that he has been captured and now they want to rescue him. But they also need to deal with some other problems because they're going back to the planet. They want to do a lot of things, but incite rebellion is pretty high on the list. So they figure out a way to jump back into the system, and this is a system that has an outer ring of ice asteroids. So they get these in motion, and because I mentioned earlier the ecological crisis on the planet, these ice asteroids are being dropped down to help improve conditions, water conditions on the planet. So they get one of these big icebergs in motion and then another one in motion, and then they do some very dangerous piloting and get clamped to them, and they ride them in system with all the others that are being sent, and being very careful to avoid sensor contact with the Star Destroyers, which are still there. No sign of the infiltrator. They ride these things down into the atmosphere and then separate and go to a safe haven that they're aware of because of their underworld contacts. And they, conduct business. They know it's going to be weeks and weeks for the ships to be repaired, and they're prepared to take that long on this planet. And if they do need to leave the planet for whatever reason, they will obtain a ship somehow. But we have a fun negotiation, meeting the underworld mechanics and whatnot, and make more friends. And during this period of time, 2 messages arrive. The first is from old enemy, the Bothan enemy of Moss, Rek, who they just dealt with at the auction and sent on his way. He lets them know in no uncertain terms that he is working for Jabba the Hutt and that he has captured their freighter and Lynn, and that if they ever want to see any of this stuff again, they will have to come and get it. They will have to deal with Jabba. Well, Jabba's got bounty hunters scouring the galaxy for them, and is pretty upset, and is very upset at Lynn, and there's no telling what he would do if he actually has her in his clutches. But Moss is very sensitive, and he's watching this transmission, and even though it's in a hologram, he still manages to catch the telltale signs of Rek lying, and he knows that the threat against Lynn and the ship and all those orphans is very, very real. But the threat is not coming from Jabba. And they put their heads together and they realize that a younger Hutt, ensconced deep in the underground in Tatooine, just waiting for his chance to topple Jabba, he's behind it. He's the one that is financing Rek and Rin Valiant. into this badly timed, very upsetting course of action. And this, again, sets the anger boiling inside Henry. Henry, who has a very special relationship with Lynn, I should add. And so what are they going to do? Are they just going to leave? Are they going to go and rescue Lynn? But they calm down and they realize that it had to have happened on the freighter, and the freighter is very slow, and there's no way that the freighter could have gotten to Tatooine yet, and they can outrace them. They've got time to deal with things on the planet. And that's when the next call comes in. Their contact in the Rebel Alliance, who they've put together with the planetary governor to hopefully oppose the Empire in some way. These two men appear battered, clearly prisoners. And they apologize, but they say that they have been captured. And then the transmission is, their part of the transmission is interrupted. They're pushed aside rudely, and the blank helmeted face of the Imperial operative, the Inquisitor, inserts itself and says, "Come here now." Well, normally I would have stopped the session right there, another cliffhanger, but we'd had so many, and we're not really sure when we get to play again, so we pushed on for another hour, which was kind of fun. So, T3 is able to trace the source of the transmission. They know where to go. They borrow planetary transport craft from the three brother repairmen, and they whisk off to the location to discover that it's a government building to which they have the plans. And Gauman, who's one of his primary abilities is the force power, Seek, is very well aware that this operative is on the top floor. So Moss is piloting the craft. Highwind and Henry are ready to go. They're Henry's new apprentice, Tyra, has been armed, and she's ready to go. She's going to fight. She's not going to be someone who just runs away from her problems. She's going to stand up, and even though she's deathly afraid of the operatives and she's afraid of what the Empire represents, she will stand up. And that all came about beautifully and naturally. She will stand up and she will talk to them about her feelings on this matter, because the very private individual, the very threatening, and for most of her experience of him, silent character of Henry, approached her while they were in the dead system and while they were riding this massive ice asteroid down to the planet. He approached her about who she was, the fact that she was a force sensitive, making it very, very plain to her what her choices were, and that they were choices, that she was free to learn or not learn, but she needed to understand what those decisions meant. And we had some fun. We were in the middle of what could have been a combat scene, and there were a certain number of us at the table that were interested in just pushing through to get to that kind of meat. But there were certain other of us at the table that really wanted to have this scene mean something. It wasn't just, hey, will you be my apprentice? Sure, let's go. But that it be role played out and be significant. And after a little bit of cajoling back and forth between these two groups within the group, that's exactly what we got. And we were able to dig down deep into these characters, into Henry and into Tyra, and bring out a discussion about what it would mean to Henry to be her teacher, and what it means to study the Force from his point of view, and what it might mean for someone in her situation who has grown up with hints or glimmers of maybe prophetic dreams, who has been dreaming about the blank faces of the Inquisitors for years, and knowing that they are coming for her at some point, and they have taken other people in her life who have vanished forever. She, for the whole course of the time that they have known her through this series of sessions, has been trying to run away, trying to be a shepherd to these other lost kids and get them off the planet, get them away from this threat. But now she's being given an opportunity to not only learn about herself and learn to protect herself, but rise up in protection of others. Will she take that chance? It's very persuasive and moving speech by Lawrence as Henry, and because of that, Tyra takes a few steps toward the hero she may one day become. And I love moments like those. And so, inspired, the group makes their stand. They come in hot and fast. They land on the rooftop. Henry leaps out, lightsaber blazing. He's asked Gauman, who has also the power of misdirect, to shield the ship, to block it, at least from the force sensitive, from the operative's view. But he wants himself exposed, and he's doing everything he can to attract the attention of the operative. He goes rushing across the roof as the ship is settling into place. Highwind is ready to jump out at a moment's notice. Everyone's weapon is drawn, and the roof falls away under Henry. He's quick enough to stop on the edge, but the operative was beneath them on the top floor, a floor 2 full stories high, like an auditorium inside the building, and he had pulled the roof down using the force power of move. Henry stops on the edge. Henry has the advantage. Henry has initiative, and it's too far down to jump. What's he going to do? And they're coming forward from the transport. They've got rope. They're going to grapple down, and the operative then uses the power of move to pull Henry down into the hole. Henry does what he can to absorb the damage of the blow with his athletics training, and is quite successful, taking fatigue and bruises, but not a lot of real damage. And then the battle is engaged. Moss comes up, Highwind comes up, and we know somewhere near them are the captives. We've got to find the captives. So Gauman is slipping away under the cloak of his ability to misdirect to find them and rescue them. Henry is going to fight a delaying battle, and they engage. And this is our most brutal use of lightsabers yet. The characters appear to be evenly matched. Henry has taken the armor of the defeated operative from the scene before, and so they're equally well defended, and they start cutting into each other piece by piece. And rather than the previous experience of, if he hits me I will die, but I have to protect my friends, Henry is now truly on the cusp of his emotional strength and weakness. He has every reason to give into his anger, and he has every reason or every need to be brave and stand between this force and the rest of his team. This is where we ended the session, with the two of them, dust blowing from the collapsed roof, standing in the rubble, attacking each other with lightsabers, to be resumed next week. This has been a very long recap. If you've made it through the end, thank you for your patience. I know some of it may seem vague. If you have questions about the details, let me know. I'll be happy to answer in comments.